Hey everyone, welcome back to AI Insights. I'm your host, Fleur Prince, founder of AI Insights and host here on the podcast. I'm here with Jen Luther. So, Jen, do you want to tell more who you are to our audience?
Absolutely. So I'm actually a human rights lawyer by training. But, after working actually where you live in The Hague at the ICC, decided that I wanted to focus my career on preventing harm from happening, not helping people once the bad things had already gone down. So I now am a technology lawyer working in San Francisco. I work at a company called Grammarly, where I run the product, privacy, and public policy arms of our legal team, thinking about topics like privacy and AI governance.
That's so awesome. I know like Grammarly back from my student days. Like I used it as my number one tool to help me make sure that my grammar was correct. So
Great.
this is really awesome, actually.
I'm glad.
So, by the way, I checked out your LinkedIn. So, as I always do for every interview, you have a pretty impressive career journey, like from legal roles to leading privacy and AI governance for companies like Atlassian and now at Grammarly. What drew you to focus on the intersection of AI, privacy, and product strategy?
Well, I wish I could say it was all a grand plan, but honestly, a lot of this technology didn't exist when I was in law school, frankly. So really how things started for me, as I mentioned before, was starting from a passion for human rights and social justice. So when I was in university, I took a lot of courses in ethics, in African history, in the law, and other departments to get an interdisciplinary focus on what it meant to have core values as a universal society. And as I mentioned as well before, working at the International Criminal Court, I really enjoyed being at the intersection of where fundamental rights start to tip into areas that are going wrong. And what I would say was a great aspect of human rights was really thinking about fundamental principles, cutting to the core of what really matters to people and to society. And although that was really enjoyable, I realized that criminal law really wasn't for me. And I wanted to be somewhere where there was a lot more, I guess, I hate to put it this way, but sort of positive engagement day to day. And what that looked like for me was working closely with people who are innovating, who are on the bleeding edge of what capabilities technology is bringing to the world, where things might also start to go wrong if we're not watchful and careful of that. So it really was a place where, as my career unfolded and as sort of the world of technology unfolded as well, I really saw myself helping to cut to the core, think about the fundamental rights issues at play, and really steer companies toward doing the right things and thinking about the unintended consequences of what they were building.
Let's see. Is it also the reason why you became a board advisor for Future of Privacy Forum?
That's right. This is going to be a bit of a what I'd call a spicy opinion, but I think that the privacy laws that
Always
were
good.
good, good, good. Yeah, the privacy laws that were designed back in, around 2018 when GDPR came into effect, I would describe them as anachronistic potentially at this moment in time. The whole premise of the privacy laws that we have today, in as much as they apply to technology, is really don't use my data. My data is mine. You can't have it. And if you want to have it, you're going to have to tell me the exact purpose. You're going to have an articulable legal basis tied to a specific purpose. In many ways, you may have to seek a really closed consent, meaning a consent that's tied to, again, an articulable sort of narrow field of applications for the data. And what we're seeing now, the way that this new technology works, especially when we think about AI agents, the starting premise is that a lot of your information will have to be accessed by an agent in order for the agent to execute basic functions on your behalf. So it's not that I don't see value in the concept of my data is mine and you can't have it. I do think that that's right and correct, although I wonder about how that will scale to a world where an agent needs to have pretty broad access as a starting premise. And I certainly think that we're in a moment where the law needs to evolve, not just in the privacy sphere, but when we think about AI governance, we're designing those systems based on the laws and the technology that exists today, and they're probably going to need to evolve over time, which is why I think the bodies like the Future Privacy Forum are so important. They're a place where folks like myself who work at companies who are seeing the technology coming into life firsthand before it's released to the market have an opportunity to come together and say, oh, we don't really have a law that's going to fit X, Y, or Z thing. And so, how can we as a collective come together truly with a spirit for the greater good and try to help our legislators and regulators worldwide understand what's coming and start to prepare the legal frameworks for those realities? I think so. I mean, I really feel for regulators. It's so hard to stay out ahead, especially when you are not working within the companies where a lot of these things are being developed very quickly. I would say the state of the law is that it's changing rapidly. I think we saw before the last US election, there was a race toward implementing new laws, potentially in the US at least, a new federal law. And now I think what we see in playing out in the global sphere is that countries are actually quite nervous to be left out in what I'd almost describe as an arms race of AI adoption. I think that there is sort of some nationalism afoot where no one wants to be left out. Everybody wants to have and feel secure in the fact that they have the latest and greatest technology. So, and again, I can take the US as an example now, given the new government that's in place. There's actually a loosening. There's actually a push toward less law to rein in that innovation because, again, states don't want to be left behind.
Do you, by the way, also see? So actually, I also saw that you worked at Atlassian, where you supported the development of generative AI features. Were the key privacy and ethical considerations that guided those implementations?
Absolutely. When I joined Atlassian, I mean, even like the large scale use of large language models throughout our product suite was sort of a twinkle in the eye. It wasn't really, formally on the roadmap even.
Yeah.
But, in the legal department, we were aware that the EU AI Act was being drafted, and we knew that once the technology was available, it would be just a rocket. It would be adopted rapidly, it would evolve rapidly. And so we actually had a project several quarters ahead of even when the first AI product was put on our roadmap within the legal department and with our human rights team to create a set of responsible AI innovation guidelines. So that was anticipatory and based very much on the draft legislation in the EU. But what we did was we sort of tried to, again, think about those fundamental principles that we could articulate and then train our builder teams, even though we didn't know exactly what AI governance infrastructure or implementation would be needed down the line, just train them in how to think about the issue spotting and the ethical considerations themselves while they were even at the earliest stages of ideation, because we knew we couldn't be in every room, but we knew that we would need to be able to show the homework that we were trying to do right by our customers and right by the world at large. Because even in the absence of legislation or in a reality where our legislation is reactive maybe or lagging sometimes behind the technology, the best way we felt we could operate ethically in that space was to create our own principles that we thought would be pretty durable. My most favorite one is really transparency. So there's a lot of transparency in those principles that ties obviously into many of the legal frameworks. And I really like that. I think it creates a concept of almost like a virtuous cycle or a feedback loop where so long as you're telling people what you're deploying, how it works, whether people are going to be given a right to opt in and out, you offer your customers and your stakeholders an opportunity to react back to that and say, actually, I don't like that. I'm not going to buy that because I don't really like how it's working. Or they can say, oh, great, I'm going to turn it on. I really like it. Fantastic. And so I think that the principle of transparency shouldn't create a one-way street. It should create a dialogue. And I personally believe that's sort of the spirit and intention behind that principle as well.
Do you yeah, do you then also see well, I won't say there's an American version of the AI Act to at least coming or partially already implemented. How do you see that actually taking hold personally on the national level?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really tricky one. I think if anybody had a good sense of this, they would be a very rich person right now. I don't, frankly, and I don't mean to be pessimistic, but I think given the state of affairs in the US right now, I think it would be quite tough to adopt a federal AI law. That said, I think that something that was quite generic and maybe lacking some of the teeth of the EU AI Act, particularly prohibitions on high risk use cases, I think that that's possible. I think it would be tough for a government administration at this point to be silent on AI for 4 more years. So I wouldn't count it out, but I also wouldn't count it in either. I guess I'm sitting on the fence a little.
Actually, what I also saw is that you've successfully actually scaled privacy organizations during the periods of rapid growth. What strategies have you actually found that are most effective in building AI governance and that enables, like, rather than hinders innovation?
Interesting. Yes. I think really the biggest mistake, and then I'll go into the way to avoid it. The biggest mistake is to sort of assume that you can take an AI governance framework off the shelf and
Hmm.
implement it in any given company. Because obviously all companies are different and all business strategies are different. So I think that actually the way that you avoid that is you need to deeply understand the business that you're working in and especially who you are selling to and who you are not. So, for example, if Grammarly were targeting all of our services toward healthcare companies in Germany, say, we would be thinking about AI governance from a very conservative viewpoint. We would be mindful of the fact that we have health data, etc. Versus if we were my mom and sister run a small marketing agency in Canada. If we were designing an AI governance framework to suit them, um, they would be a lot more comfortable with us using their data, and we would probably have a much lighter form of AI governance for the company at that point. So, what I really like to see in the very beginning is just a deep knowing and understanding of the business, which requires folks who are in a legal or a compliance role to do something that is unfamiliar, which is just a ton of active listening and curiosity around your stakeholders and what they're building and why. The first thing that I did when I joined Grammarly was I sat down and looked at the company's objectives and key results for the year. I looked at what was happening with our user adoption. I looked at what was happening with our technical infrastructure and almost did a survey of the whole company with about everything that was going on except for the world that I was going to be running before I thought about the world that I was going to be running. So I think that that really is sort of the necessary first step because again, if you're not tailoring your program to where you're actually working, then you are going to waste a ton of time and resources and you may also not get the buy-in and the stakeholder participation that you're going to need.
I see. But when I was also, by the way, you mentioned that as an elite Division One athlete, you learned that all players have equal value and excellence comes from consistent effort. How do you apply these principles when building teams like for responsible AI ethics and governance?
Well, I'm incredibly passionate about defining shared goals and working cross-functionally to help teams and companies succeed. So, something that I call operational effectiveness is a big passion of mine, and it's a big theme in my work. And part of, I think, what you're hearkening back to, which I so appreciate you noticing about my athletic career, is that my brother-in-law, when at one point coached a soccer team that I was on, and he would always say every player is like a different tool in a toolbox, and every problem or every game is going to be solved by using a different set of tools. And that was sort of his way of saying, sometimes you might be on the bench and sometimes you might be in the game and it's not personal. It's just because we all have different skill sets. So I think, for example, lawyers and engineers have very different roles to play in AI governance. And lawyers and engineers can sometimes in-house end up working in their own corners, so to speak, like really not gathering to share their work with one another. And I think it's really important for everybody to be bringing their experiences and their work together and recognizing the shared value of the different work that you're delivering. So what we do is we have rituals, like business rituals, where at the beginning of each fiscal quarter, we bring together our teams of privacy engineers, lawyers, program managers, product people, and we share our thoughts on what everybody should be focusing on in the next quarter. And we sort of look each other in the eye. We create sometimes like a slide deck that says, these are my ideas for how we can have the most impact on improving our AI governance roadmap or privacy roadmap. And hey, you over in engineering, I actually need you to contribute to part of that because when I'm done creating a policy, I need someone to implement it. And engineering might say, we have a new initiative. We want to build out a piece of our technical infrastructure, and we're going to need your policy to account for that. So that's why I sort of say that everybody has equal value in terms of bringing the perspective of what they're working on. And by consistently investing in helping one another's projects account for all of the different bits and pieces and dependencies from different departments, I think we move faster and get better results.
Do you also see this happening when you're looking like at the numbers as well?
Do you mean
Sorry,
like
just personal curiosity. Yeah, like if you implement these strategies, that you actually also see it in the numbers as well, that things are like going upwards.
meaning like user acquisition or well, I guess, that's a fair question. We usually at the beginning of each project, we define what does success look like, so to speak. Like when we're done with
Hmm.
the project, how do we know that it had the impact we desired? And sometimes that means, do we know that users are adopting a new feature? Or it could conversely mean, are we getting negative feedback from users through our support channels and things like that? But it could also mean, are people able to innovate quickly with appropriate controls in place? So do we have a lot of people? What is our time to resolution of privacy or AI governance questions and reviews internally? So there's a number of ways that we measure success. And I would say not every project hits the way you want it to, but I do see a general trend line over time that these shared investments and these improved projects have better impact over time.
What emerging trends in AI do you believe will actually have the biggest impact on privacy and governance in the next few years?
Ooh, I think the biggest, well, right now it's going to be all about agents. I think that
Of
when
course.
yeah, exactly. Like everybody wants to talk about that. And I guess now I'm falling into that trap. But if we are truly able to see agents coming into the market in the next year, by that I mean agents that have their own ability to reason and execute tasks without just using predictive pattern recognition algorithmic, outputs. I think that the legal frameworks that we've been relying on and the government governance frameworks that we have created will
Hmm.
inevitably need to change again. I don't think that our laws currently account for systems that are thinking for themselves, potentially without human review or oversight, that are not high risk. So I think that those use cases are what are going to be challenging the structures that we have right now in place.
I definitely, like, based on your story, I do see laws around this taking a 360,
Yeah.
just simply because the technology is evolving so quickly into something that we cannot even imagine right now what it's going to be like next year, even.
Right.
I'm going to ask you one more question, and that's for the audience specifically. What advice would you give to companies that are just beginning to develop their AI governance framework?
That's a great question. I would go back to something I said earlier, which is start by knowing your customer, who you are designing for, and who you're not. And then from there, I would think about leveraging economies of scale. Don't just build an AI governance framework, build a trust governance framework. Build something that leverages the economies of scale and the overlap between privacy, security, responsible AI innovation, and other pillars of trust. Because your governance system will fail if you have multiple streams of different things that compete to achieve the same outcomes. So it's very important to think about, for example, aligning what you're doing to your privacy program That would be sort of where I would start.
Well, thanks so much for sharing that with our audience. If you guys have any more questions, please feel free to reach out to Jen. You can contact her through LinkedIn. I will tag her in the LinkedIn post so you guys can see what she's up to and learn all about AI governance. And oh, you have to go to your next call. So I'm going to close it down. So Jen, thanks so much for joining us. It was really awesome to learn about your career and a bit more indeed about AI governance and what's happening in it. And everyone, thanks for listening. So we're quickly gonna get out. So stay AI amazing.
Thank you.